Before we begin, we want to provide a content warning. In today's episode, we will be discussing sensitive topics related to sexual issues, which may not be suitable for all listeners. We encourage you to listen with discretion, especially if you are in a public setting or have young ears nearby. Our goal is to approach these discussions with Christ-like respect and care, offering valuable insights and information. Thank you for joining us.
Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Golden Hour podcast. My name is Matt Tullis.
I'm Beth Moore.
And it is so good to be back in the studio with you and a special guest.
We have Dr. Jonathan Chapman, who is on staff at TBMB. He works as the BCM director for East Tennessee State University, my home area, Northeast Tennessee, right?
That's right.
There's not just 3 grand regions, right, Jonathan? There's four. Northeast Tennessee is very different.
And they're number one. They will tell you that.
Didn't they used to be their own state? I don't know.
Well,
maybe a state of confusion.
Okay. Yeah.
That's right. But we are not just East Tennessee. We are Northeast Tennessee.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Its own distinction. But Jonathan's here to talk with us about issues around LGBTQ plus things, which is a hard topic. It is a hard topic for our church leaders, for our church members, for all of us to know how to talk about this well and to say things well in a way that honors the Lord and truth.
Well, even this past week had friends who are going through this with 2 of their kids.
Okay.
And they homeschool, just incredible parents, Bible-believing, know they got the word. And I want to just start by asking you if parents or if some people in your family are going through this thing, what would you say to them? What are some words that you'd have for believers who are trying to live by the word and going through this incredible announcement that's been in their family?
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things, when I'm traveling the state and I'm speaking at churches and speaking at conferences, this is the number one question we get. What do I do when a church member's child or grandchild or friend or whatever the case may be announces that they're gay or lesbian or trans or whatever, something, right? Non-binary or
Right.
whatever. And so I think that's the number one question we're dealing with right now, especially with church members. And so, I would encourage them. There's a couple of things. We have several movements happening in America right now related to LGBT, related to sex and gender. And, the first thing I always tell them is to calm down and to pull back a little bit. Because our immediacy is to have a knee-jerk reaction and to say, okay, my kid just announced that they're non-binary. The first question is, well, what does that even mean?
Right.
I'm already freaking out because I don't even know what that is.
Right. And
so, one of the things that we've looked at through a lot of research, when it comes to sort of the trans movement has really sort of morphed into what we call the non-binary movement. And we have these terms that are much more broad brushstroke type things like queer or pansexual or non-binary. And they're much broader brushstroke because I'm basically trying to identify as something without identifying as something. And so it's a little bit broader based, and there's some, we have something called rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is not technically gender dysphoria, but it's sort of a social contagion thing that's beginning to happen now that we see in middle school, high school, a little bit in college, where a lot of students are identifying as some of these things, something LGBTQ related, for popularity, to escape bullying, just basically because it's becoming cool, popular, and easy to do. Because of that, we can say, based off statistics, we can say about 85 to 90% of the time, if you have a family member or somebody that's going to identify as one of these things, I would say 9 times out of 10, they're not going to identify as that into adulthood.
Is it about, I know we've talked with Tiffany Hudson just about college ministry in general and collegiate work and what college students are looking for. And she was telling us they're looking for like acceptance and belonging. Is that what some of this is maybe be rooted in?
100%. I think one of the biggest things, I always tell people, so I'm a dad of 2 girls, and the hardest time in our life was when they were in middle school. Just the level of bullying and things that happen, especially with girls. And because of that, we see just a huge disproportion of, you'll look and you'll see, maybe an adult who's in their 30s, maybe an adult that's in their 50s. The percentages of somebody identifying as LGBT just drops dramatically. When we start getting down to college and then back down to high school and then back down to middle school, now we're talking about 17, 18, 19, 20%. Is there really 1 out of every 5 students in middle school that are LGBT? I don't think so. And so, and that number almost doubles when we go to girls in middle school. Is there really 2 out of 5, girls that actually are LGBT, or are they struggling with bullying, acceptance? And here's the thing, guys, the safest place to be on the planet right now in middle school and high school, and even in college, is in an LGBT group. No one's going to attack that group.
Wow.
Right.
No one's going to speak out against that group, especially when we had heavy cancel culture over the last 5 or 10 years.
Right.
That's beginning to fade a little bit, but, that's the safest place I can be. And if I'm not really lesbian, if I'm not really gay, if I'm not really trans, the safest thing for me to do is identify as non-binary or queer or pansexual, because it's a very broad brushstroke thing that I don't really have to explore all that much, but it's going to keep me safe for the next 4 to 8 years of my middle school and high school career, and I'm out of here. So it's very contagion level, and it's also survival.
And so what I'm hearing you say is that there's some grooming aspect from our
100%.
society. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think part of it is this is so funny. I was at the beach last week, and ran into a really good friend of mine that I had grown up with, and we were talking about all the dumb things that we had done over the years in middle school and high school. And to my kids' chagrin, they were just like, "Dad, what in the world? How'd you survive?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know how I'm here." But it's so funny because, one of the first things I said, and everybody started laughing, I'm so glad that social media wasn't around then.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, I'm this nice minister now, right, at East Tennessee State University, and I work with college students, and there's a lot of dumb things I did, and I'm glad they're not on the internet for everyone to see.
The internet is forever.
Right, and it's so crazy. That adds such a layer, multiple layers, from parents and teachers and students. A middle school girl, she can't do anything now. I tell everybody all the time, reality doesn't matter anymore to a middle schooler, especially a middle school girl. It's perception. Perception is everything. They will, hey, you made me mad, and so now I'm going to put on the internet that you slept with this boy, and you like this kid, and you did this, and you talked about this girl, and I'm going to put all that out on the social media.
Right.
And literally the girl, before she can say, I didn't do this, everyone thinks she did it.
Wow. Yeah.
And that kind of pressure, where can I go to escape this? And how can I push through this? And what does that look like? And so again, some of it's survival, some of it's, kind of this social contagion level of I'm just comfortable in this group.
Well, I think, as a former middle school girl.
Yeah, that's right. You remember.
Well, lots of things are happening. Bodies are changing.
She's a lot closer than
to middle school.
Yes.
Yeah, than you two.
Although I act.
It's
more
true.
Close.
It's true.
But just thinking, sweet girls in middle school.
Yeah.
Boys are starting to notice some, maybe they're not noticing others. And if you want to, all of those things are happening.
Yep.
And if you're not being noticed, is there a reason why? And so now I can go join this group where I am accepted and welcome because I'm not one of the girls that all the boys are talking to or talking about or whatever.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, guys. We all want to feel accepted, and we want to feel loved, and we want to feel comfortable. We want friendships. And, if I'm a girl in middle school and if the guys aren't noticing me, and a girl does notice me, even if I'm not gay, even if I'm not lesbian, it still feels good to be liked.
Right.
And so there's this pressure to just say, well, I'm just going to join in with this group anyway. Now, does that erase the 1 out of 10? There is 10% that it's legitimate and they literally have these feelings and they are going through some of these things. So, you're going to have, it's not I always tell every, church member, this isn't a perfect solution.
Right.
The hey, pull back 90%, yeah, that's awesome. And I am going to pull back. I am going to calm down. Apparently maybe my child's not going to continue in this, and that's awesome. But it's not always roses. It doesn't always work out perfectly. And sometimes your child continues in this, and sometimes it's a struggle. And the greatest encouragement I could give to those parents is you've got to love your child through this. You've got to continue to be in their lives, offer them hope, offer them truth. A lot of parents will cling to the proverb, if I raise my kid in the way they should go, then they're going to turn out great. And I'm like, yes, but it's proverbial. You've got to remember,
right.
This doesn't mean it's not going to be a rocky road. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't, and one thing to say, they may turn from the truth, but you've got to make sure you're continually offering truth, because they're refusing truth. Then they can return to it. If there's no truth on the table, they're not gonna. There's nothing to return to.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, you've mentioned movements. So like when I was in high school, there was maybe just like, you're gay or you're straight. And that was kind of the end of the conversation. If it even was a conversation, which it really wasn't in East Tennessee at my high school, in the 90s.
Right.
But, for parents now that are maybe dealing with their teenagers or their young adults, they only remember or know or understand gay or straight. So explain to us like a little bit more about the differences of these movements that you
Absolutely,
mentioned.
sure. It's so crazy because we were talking about this too. When I was coming through, queer was like the worst word you could use to describe a gay person. And now queer is very accepted, and it's actually more of what you should say.
But it means not
so queer. Queer is a very loose term. If I say I'm queer, I just mean I'm not straight.
Okay.
I'm not cisgender. I'm not heteronormative. I'm
using some $5 words.
Yeah, sorry about
totally
that.
Is,
it in all, like for all intents and purposes, it means I'm not straight. I am not a straight man. But I'm not necessarily saying I'm gay. I'm not necessarily saying I'm bi. I'm not necessarily saying I could be lots of things.
Okay.
And it could even mean that I'm questioning or thinking through things and still deciding what I am. And so queer is an easy way for me to say, hey, I'm not straight, but I haven't really decided what I am yet.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is really interesting because that's not and in our relativistic society today, that doesn't seem all that odd. To have something that's not really solidified, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we were growing up, that one,
that was a
you're
really
gay or you're straight,
and that was a very unkind word to use,
right?
About someone.
You wouldn't say that. It was very derogatory, and it was just something like literally, like even in your mind, like I'm not going to say that because it's very offensive, and all these kinds of things, and so things have changed a lot. That's another thing I would encourage, church members and parents and grandparents out there. If your child comes to you and they say they're gay, my first question would be, okay, what do you mean by that?
Okay.
That's got to be the first question. What do you mean by that? Don't freak out. Pull back a little bit. Remember to pull back.
Right.
Hey, 9 out of 10, let's pull back for a second. What do you mean by that? Because
tell me more.
Yeah, today, saying you're gay doesn't necessarily mean you're a homosexual in the sense that we thought of when we were growing up. Mm-hmm. Now, it could mean, if I say I'm gay, I could mean what Paul means in 1 Corinthians 6, someone who practices homosexual activity, homosexual sex, someone who practices those things. If you're somebody, if you're a millennial or younger, or like a millennial or older, that's all homosexual ever meant to you. It was just somebody that practiced homosexual activities. That is a definition, but then somebody could say they're homosexual. They may mean that they just have same-sex attraction. Now that's a big one that has sort of exploded the last 10 years, same-sex attraction has really come on the scene and come on the table in churches. And a lot of pastors and leaders, they don't know what to do with that.
Right.
Like, someone comes to you and they say, hey, I have same-sex attraction. This could be somebody that, did practice homosexual activity, but now is not. You could have somebody that has same-sex attraction that has never practiced homosexual activity ever, but they still may say they're gay. And so that's where things get a little hairy. And then where it really gets weird, there are some formerly gay, formerly lesbian individuals who will still identify as gay, even if they are not practicing anymore. They may even be in a heterosexual type relationship, or just not in a relationship, or not going to be in a relationship anymore, but they still might identify as gay because that's the community that's closest to them. And it just makes more sense to say I'm gay or I'm homosexual because I still have some of those feelings. And so that's where it gets a little weird because, that's why I want to ask them, what do you mean by that? I would say 70% of the time, 75% of the time in a church, if somebody says that to me, they typically mean they have same-sex attraction, typically. And so and most of those times they have not acted on it. And so that's where church members and leaders can that's where we have to love them and surround them and take care of them and ask good questions and say, how can I help you? How can I walk through this with you?
I think that's what you had just said. I was going to ask you exactly that, because so many times we're afraid of all of these terms and what they mean. Yep. And what it can imply. And, we now are afraid of words like inclusive or welcoming because it can mean that we're
right
approving of instead of just loving people well in the midst of what they're trying to walk through. So I'm so glad that you said that, like, just try to care for them and understand what they mean and how I can help them. So,
and I think that's the hardest thing right now. When I talk to students that are struggling with same-sex attraction, or if they identify with anything LGBT, church is not a place I can go. It's a place I do go to. My parents make me go. I have to go. Some of them might even say I enjoy going. But I don't think in their minds they think this is the place I go to figure these things out and to walk through these things. And that's I think, sort of the misstep and where we're beginning to sort of miss these things in church. This stuff has to be on the table.
That's right.
We have to constantly be talking about it. We have to be walking through these things with students, with leaders, pastors. We need to help train pastors in this so they can train their people. And I think the greatest encouragement I could give, at least to pastors and leaders that are trying to walk these parents through these things, the first thing we always do when this situation comes up, or any of these situations come up, I'm immediately going to pull out my Bible and I'm going to go to the 6 to 14 verses that we have that talk against this. You have same-sex attraction, or, you just told me you're a homosexual. Well, let me tell you how the Bible says that homosexuality is wrong and terrible and bad, and you're a bad person. We may not say that last part, but that's how they feel.
Right.
And so
that's the subtext.
100%. Right. And so I think what we've got to do is shift the narrative. Let's go back to Genesis 1 and 2. Let's go to Ephesians 5. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 7. Let's talk about what, God's original intent for sexuality was. Like, let's go back to the beginning and talk about what marriage really looks like, what sexuality really looks like, and walk them through that a little bit more, because the Bible is much more positive about what sex and gender needs to be versus what it doesn't need to be.
Right.
I mean, certainly you don't ignore those verses by any means. I just don't think those are the verses we start with.
Because if somebody comes to me and says I'm struggling with anything else, most often we tend to err with the like, well, let me assure you that God still loves you.
Yes.
But for this area, that's not what we do.
Exactly.
And most people, they're coming to you as a leader in ministry, as a believer, Because I would guess they already are struggling with like something isn't right. This isn't okay. And so I'm coming to you to help me understand.
100%.
So we don't need to push them down more by.
You have a middle school boy or girl or high school boy or girl, they come to you and they, they're dealing with identity issues, weight issues, whatever,
Right.
Do we immediately start going to verses about how that's bad and condemning? No, I take them to Ephesians and we talk about identity in Christ and who we really are. And, and so it's such a weird, and again, I think it's the knee-jerk reaction that we were just talking about that, this is freaking me out. I'm scared. My kid just said this and I don't really know what to do. So I'm just going to tell them that this is bad and terrible. And I'm going to try to go to the verses I can remember.
So kind of what I hear you saying is listen first.
Yes.
And get them to tell you more about that. I've heard you speak about the pseudoscience aspect of this. Could you unpack that?
Yes. So we have the homosexual movement and then we have the transgender movement. Really what we're living in now is the non-binary movement. And I'll get to that in a minute, but the like a true trans movement is really what we sort of lived through the last 20 or 30 years. That was really somebody saying, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body.
Yeah.
So I need to transition. That's truly what trans means, right? I'm going to transition from one gender to another. And we really don't have that today. So if you're talking to someone and they're truly identifying as trans, if they're over the age of, say, 40, then they're probably going to be using pseudoscience to justify what they believe. And it is sort of pseudoscientific. They're going to say things like, yes, I'm a male and I was born this way, but my brain is female. I think like a female. I talk like a female. My voice is higher. That's why I think I need to shift some of these things around. 100 years ago, if I went to a doctor and I said, "Hey, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body," they would have sat me down and they would have said, "Okay, your brain is out of whack, and we need to work through this and counsel through this, and we're going to work with you and maybe even have some medicines or whatever, and we're going to try to get your brain back matching with your body." Today, it's the dead opposite. If I go into a doctor's office today and I say that, they're going to say, "Okay, your brain is absolutely right. The inner you is what is correct, and we're going to try to change everything about your body to get you matched up with your brain."
Right.
That's where the pseudoscience comes into play of just like, we would never do that with anything else, and so it's that shift. Now the non-binary movement that has shifted way away from trying to make sense of it and pseudoscience explain it and those kinds of things. Most people under the age of 40 now, they don't even go that route.
Right.
I just want to be who I am, and it doesn't matter.
So as we think about this, it just seems to be everywhere. On the news, in our entertainment, it seems like that there always has to be a gay character or this issue in everything. As you're dealing with constantly, you live in this world of collegiates. Do you think that, say, in 2040, this is going to still be the issue that will be pressing in on them?
There'll still be an issue related to sex and gender.
Yeah.
But it won't look like what it looks like now. Not to scare anybody out there, but I think with artificial intelligence, with sort of what we call the transhuman movement of melding technology with human beings, I don't think you're going to deal with this at all, because in, say, 2040, 2050, 2060, if I'm a trans person, so to speak, I want to change my gender. Okay. I can probably live that out in some type of avatar. I almost think this will be archaic in some ways.
Wow.
We will be talking about it, but it will sound different. It will look different.
Just morph into something completely.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is going to rapidly change, much like the technology is going to rapidly change. Right. Because again, why would I need to even do that? And why would I damage my body when I could just live in another body or live somehow, some way else, through technology. I'm not going to hurt myself. That sounds dumb, right? That's going to sound really dumb down the road.
And they're also in 20 years are going to know the effects of all the medications and all the procedures that people are having right now that we don't really know how that's the long-term effects.
Yeah, I would encourage a lot of people out there. I mean, I think most of us in church know this to be true. We just think logically, but the medicines and the surgeries, this is going to come back to bite, because just like we're talking about this right now, hey, in 20, 30, 40 years, this is going to look so different.
We might be talking more about detransitioning.
You're going to have you're already having detransitioners. Mm-hmm. We can't even get a really good statistic because it's happening so fast. You have people detransitioning every other day. It's crazy. And you have a lot of detransitioners that are really getting put on the stage now. You'll hear them on a lot of podcasts and see them on the news, and it'll be conservative news, but you will see them. The LGBT community cannot stand when somebody detransitions, but it's happening at a rapid pace.
So what do I do if somebody comes into my church and they look like a man or a woman, but they say, "Oh, I used to be the opposite, and I want to go back to that"?
Yeah. I think that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about the next 20, 30, 40 years. I think over those 20, 30, 40 years, you're going to have this situation a lot, where somebody comes in, they want to speak to the pastor. Hey, I heard your sermon. It's incredible. I became a believer. The gospel, penetrated my heart, and whole 9 yards. By the way, I used to be a woman, and now I'm a man, and I don't want to be anymore. Mm-hmm. But what do I do? Right. And the answer is, we're going to try to encourage them to go back and detransition as much as they possibly can. Mm-hmm. The hard part is going to come into play when you have people that have cut things off, or they've taken medicines for so long they can't go back, or they can only go back a certain amount. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the harder part. I think where I would encourage pastors there, when we talk about the gospel, most times we leave a lot of heaven out.
That's what I was just thinking.
We really we will throw it in at the end, but I think it's so important to talk about the new heavens and the new earth, and God recreating everything, including us. And just like I would encourage, if I was talking to somebody today and they were a paraplegic or a quadriplegic, I would encourage them. I would say, you're going to walk again one day. And I say it with confidence, because we know when we look in Scripture, we know that Jesus is going to make us whole again. And in the new heaven and new earth, we will be whole again. I think you say the same thing to somebody that has transitioned and wanting to detransition, is that you will be made whole again. It's hard for us sometimes, because I don't think we think that way right now, because I don't think we think about this at all, right?
Right.
And so, but that's where pastors are going to come into play. They're going to need to encourage them just like they would anybody else that's had something damaged, with their body. And so that's how we're going to encourage them.
But all of us are damaged and broken this 100%. Side of heaven. We all are, whether anybody else can see it or know it.
Absolutely. My father is 83 and having a lot of health issues. Was a computer engineer all of his life, and has dementia. Is now on a cane. I think about these things, and I was talking to my brother. It was so crazy. There's so much talk about this with politics. These kinds of things are on the scene, right?
Right.
And we were just so sad for my dad, because he's not the man he used to be.
But he's not the man he's going to be.
But he's not the man he's going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the key, and that's the encouragement we give him. That's the encouragement we give my mom. That's the encouragement for me as I'm watching. I mean, it's sad to watch that happen to somebody we love. But regardless, we do things to ourselves, through sin.
Right.
But sin also affects us. The fall affects us. And,
right.
I'm breaking down. We're breaking down.
Bluebell has affected.
Right.
them.
It's
Yes.
not, yeah. I had Baskin Robbins last night. It's hurting a little bit this morning, but that's okay. But that's part of it, right? Is knowing, that we're going to be made whole and full again. And so I think that's the encouragement that pastors are going to need to bring to the table when they're walking somebody like that through this of detransitioning back, because they're going to want to.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to want to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, one of the greatest encouragements I can give too, if you're talking to somebody, whether it's a family member or a friend or somebody you just met or somebody that maybe walked into your church, that's going to start happening more and more too, believe it or not. And you're talking to somebody, they're LGBT or were or whatever, and they're struggling through things. Be honest with them. Be honest with them. Our tendency is to pull back and sugarcoat scripture to make it fit a narrative or to make it more palatable for them. And that is not the best way to go. Our fear is like, if I start presenting the gospel to them, they're out. They're out of here. And in my mind, I'm like, listen, the gospel is going to be offensive if somebody's lost. It doesn't matter what they're struggling with. It's going to be offensive. But the dilemma that I have seen and I've talked to with former LGBT, when they become a believer and they begin to read some of these things for themselves, and they begin, the Holy Spirit begins to illuminate things to them, then all of a sudden they're like, why did you tell it to me this way?
It's kind of like politics, isn't it? Because we're in our little silos, and
Yes.
and they're kind of over in their little silo, and they don't really hear some of the things that you're talking about.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's some of this is going, I'm LGBT and you're over here trying to tell me, everything that I don't believe and everything that I go against and everything, but when I become this, I now become a believer and I believe these things, and now I'm starting to read about sex and gender myself from scripture. And this friend of mine that led me to Christ did it in this weird sort of sugarcoating kind of way. It'll come back to haunt you. It'll be a backfire where you'll have to sort of be like, yeah, I was really just trying to make it more palatable. And they'll be like, why? So I encourage people to just give them the gospel and be loving and kind.
I want to circle back around to what you were saying, that I've never heard it phrased, or the idea, the line of thought. There was, when I was growing up, new wave, punk.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
Grunge and emo. And are you saying that this is like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so that's part of the rapid onset gender dysphoria is this, rapid, all of a sudden all these students are becoming, LGBT in some way, shape or form. And it's happening seemingly overnight. My middle schooler has never mentioned any of this. And now all of a sudden in 6th or 7th grade, immediately she's pansexual.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And you have.
Okay. Pansexual.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But all of a sudden you've got like these 30 friends. Now all of a sudden overnight, 30 friends, they're all gay. And that's part of it. That's where that fad is coming. Yes. This is, if I go to high school, I don't see emo kids. I don't see grunge kids. I grew up in the grunge era. I loved it. I just don't see it anymore. People still listen to the music.
Right.
The music's still there. And there's still, we always have, when it comes to fads, there's always remnants of the fad. But I'm not walking around. If I go to a middle school or high school today, I'm not going to see an emo kid.
No.
But I am probably going to see, a girl in the corner with blue hair, a lot of crazy piercings, and she's going to be talking about something hyper political that she doesn't understand at all. And there's going to be 30 of them. And in 4 years, I will go back to that high school and they will be seniors and I won't see any of that.
Wow.
It will die as quickly as it comes. And there is a fad level to this and a contagion level to this. And that's we're seeing it. The LGBT community and a lot of revisionists with scripture, they're going to push back against that and say, this isn't even a real thing. But empirical evidence tells us it's absolutely true. We see it in every middle school, every high school. And we see that begin to die in college and then into young adulthood. They just, by 25, 90% of them will not be identifying as anything they said they were in middle school.
So you're talking about maybe middle school girls experiencing something right now, and then by the time they're seniors, this will go away. But how do we not, sometimes then we can just be dismissive and act like it is a fad. I mean, we all know
Right.
what it was like when our
Sure.
parents dismissed the things that we thought were really important.
100%.
How do we handle that in such a way that we recognize it might change, but right now it's very real to them?
Right. Yeah. If you're a parent, grandparent, a leader, especially if you're a leader at your church and you work with youth, again, I think you don't. The worst thing you can do is to have the knee-jerk reaction, right? Oh my gosh, this person just told me they're queer, or they just told me they're lesbian, or they just told me they're gay. Now I'm freaking out, and now I'm gonna break out the biggest, thickest KJV I can and start going through as many verses as possible. Like, no, pull back a minute. Like we were talking about with Matt earlier, ask them good questions.
Yeah.
That's the first thing you need to do. Okay. You just told me you're queer. Okay. What does that mean? And you can even say things. What does that mean to you? Now we hate those questions, right? It's so relative, right? But for them, they're like, oh, yeah, what? Yeah, this is personal to me, and I feel deeply. And so, yes, I'm glad you asked me how it feels to me. And they're going to try to explain it out a little bit.
Which gives them some of what they're looking for, which is belonging and acceptance.
Yes.
You're listening, you're engaging with them where they are.
You validate them.
Right. As a person.
Does anybody on this planet not want to be validated in what they feel? And so I think one of those things, if you know, this is the crazy thing. If you know in the back of your mind, hey, 85 to 90% of these students are not going to identify as, okay, that gives you a lot of leverage. It gives you a lot of power, and it also gives you a lot of comfort.
And patience.
Yes, have the patience. Know and understand, if they came up to you and they were struggling, with a parent issue or an identity issue or something like that, you would not freak out the same way.
Right.
And the reason why you wouldn't freak out the same way is because you think to yourself, you know what? I remember going through this when I was in middle school.
And this will pass. This
will come and go, right? And knowing that it empowers you, but it also is hopeful. It brings a comfort and a level, that you can't, that we're not, I don't think parents are experiencing right now. I don't think youth leaders are experiencing right now because there's just so much freak out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you pull back from that, treat them how you would with any other situation, any other sin issue, any other confusion issue. You would just walk through life with them, and you would give them scripture, and you would love them, and you would provide a space, and you would be a person that they know that they can come to when they're confused about things. And that's what they need.
Now, I'm originally just a guy from Dry Prong, Louisiana. So I want to play Jeopardy with you, but you don't have to place them in form of a question. I'm just going to throw out some terms.
Yeah.
And then if you don't know them, then we're all in trouble. So, and some of these, it may sound really stupid, but again, my background. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So somebody says asexual.
Yeah, they're asexual. Yeah, that means I'm not sexual in any way, shape, or form. That means I don't want to have sex, and it also means that typically what it means is I'm not any gender. Now that sounds weird to even say it like that, right? But it's a way for me to be genderless. It's a way for me to not be black or white and identify as anything, right?
I don't want to be in the game.
Yeah, I'm not putting anything. Well, I want to be in the game, but as a very non-conformative player.
Okay.
You can't deal with me.
So it doesn't mean being a monk.
Right. It doesn't mean being a monk. No, they don't mean that by any means. You'll hear asexual. You'll hear, I'm gender fluid. I'm just,
okay. I'm going to mark that one off my list.
I'm gender fluid. That means, I'm sort of now the irony of all ironies, when I'm having conversations with LGBT students and, if they say they're, I'm gender fluid or, I'm gender non-conformative or whatever. I'm like, all right, you're gender fluid. What does that mean? And we'll start having that conversation, and they'll be like, well, I'm not male or female. I'm like, right, you're not male or female. You're fluid. Fluid between what? Between these 2 points, right, that exist, right? Or they'll say something like, I'm bisexual, and I'm like, okay, you're bisexual. Well, what is the bi? Well, it's male and female, right? Now, ironically, today, most people will not say bisexual. In fact, if you say bisexual, if you're under the age of 40, and certainly under the age of 30, if you say bisexual, you'll almost get a little pushback.
Really?
Oh, yeah, you mean pansexual. You mean you're pansexual.
Which means?
So, yeah.
Pansexual. So bisexual means I like men and I like women. But if I say bisexuality, I'm saying there are two sexes.
Oh.
There's no other way around that. I'm bisexual.
So in that world, that's kind of politically incorrect.
It's not correct in the non-binary world. Now, in the trans world, that makes sense, right?
Okay.
I'm these two sexes. I'm these two genders.
Is that
They
the same
exist.
as being gender queer?
No, gender queer is a whole nother ball game. Gender queer is a very so if I'm talking about being gender fluid, okay, I'm talking about my gender and this is how I identify. If I'm talking about queer, I'm just saying I'm not straight, I'm not heterosexual, I'm not heteronormative is how they'll say it.
Is that the same as gender dysphoria?
No, gender dysphoria. So
I'm losing.
I know.
Losing track of all the things.
So gender dysphoria, the LGBT community really doesn't even like that term. So there was a time when if I had an incongruency between my brain and how I saw myself sexually and my body and how it is sexually, if there's an incongruency there, then I might have some type of dysphoria, which means I have a type of disorder and I need counseling and I maybe need to walk through some of these things like we talked about earlier. And they don't like that because I don't want anything to say that I'm not normal. Right. And
or that it's any kind of mental.
Yeah, there's nothing mentally wrong with me at all. And so they push that off the table. The hard thing about that is there are a lot of students, like we were talking about, people in churches, people in schools that actually truly have dysphoria. And if they could get some counseling, it would be super helpful. And I highly encourage that in churches. You need to know the counselors in your area, and you need to make sure you have some good Christian counselors, biblical counselors who know how to deal with this from a Christian perspective. Because if you send them to a secular counselor, they're going to say you don't have dysphoria, you're absolutely normal, and everything's fine.
And here's medicine to help you change your gender.
Yeah. The current. There's starting to be some pushback on this, and that's good. But the current sort of motif is, if you come to me as a counselor or a doctor or whatever, psychiatrist, the best thing I can do is gender affirming care. So I'm going to affirm you, and I'm going to push you into medicines and puberty blockers and surgeries, and I'm going to push you that way. And that's the best thing for me to do right now. And that's what's being taught in the secular world is that, you just encourage them into as far as you can take them. And so obviously we don't want to do that.
Right.
Okay. Next term, and some of these again, may be redundancies here.
Fine.
Intersex. What is that? Yeah.
So intersex is an interesting one. Intersex is used a lot to try to, elevate and make normal transgenderism. And the reality is intersex is a genetic disorder where I might be born as a man, but I, through a mutation, I might be born with some female genitalia parts or female, parts of some type, or vice versa. A female might be born with some male type. The hardest part with intersex, the argument is, hey, because there's intersex, then transgenderism is great, and we need to do it, and it should exist, and this, that, and the other, because we already have these people that are pretty much male and female anyway. They're gender fluid. No. In fact, a lot of intersex, there are some intersex that agree with that statement, but there's a lot of intersex people that are like, no, I don't, I have a physical abnormality.
Right.
And you're trying to elevate this mental thing over here. You're actually damaging yourself. Right?
You're self-harm.
You're doing self-harm, and I'm over here with something that I didn't do to myself, and I was just sort of like, it's just the way I am. The hardest part about intersex, that there is no new sex. Intersex is not, this is not a new sex. There's still the male and the female. But the biggest thing I would say about intersex is the vast majority of intersex individuals, 99.99% of them with a line over it, they're not born 50-50.
Right.
Yeah, they're not born 50% male and 50% female. Again, almost 100%, 99.99% of the time, when they are born and they have this abnormality and there is this genetic, the doctors can tell what they should have been.
Right.
And that's typically the direction they go. And so, I mean, the vast majority of the time,
rare.
You'll have a male that has
very rare.
Oh, it's so rare. There is, I can't remember what it's called, but there is I think it's like a 1 in a billion chance that you could be born 50-50, but even then it's still 50% male, 50% female. But the vast majority of intersex individuals just live out their life as what they were intended to be, a male or a female. Now, because of our LGBT rhetoric over the last 10 or 15 years, they're being encouraged not to live that way. Hey, you should have been fluid. And, they're almost being backtracked in life, and it's not good. But again, a lot of intersex individuals don't like being lumped in
with that movement.
But that's the I that comes into play in the acronym now. But they're not,
Next term.
Yes.
Outing
Someone. Okay. So in the LGBT community, they want to announce themselves, whether they are gay or lesbian or trans or whatever they are. Or
it's like on a Facebook post
typically they'll come out to their family first. And hope that goes well and that they're accepted. Now the problem is, if they're coming out, they want to be accepted. Accepted means you have to say everything I'm saying is good. Right? If a parent accepts them for who they are and loves them, but disagrees with their decision, they're going to say it didn't go well, even if they were treated kindly and all that kind of stuff. They're going to say, no, my parents don't support me and this, that, and the other, and they're terrible, blah, blah, blah. But the hard part, and then yes, they'll probably come out online, they'll come out to their friends. But outing is when you maybe accidentally announce that on social media, typically, where maybe you say something like your friend is lesbian or your friend is trans, or hey, my best friend told me tonight that they were trans,
Okay.
If they know who your best friend is, then you've just outed them, right?
Gotcha.
Accidentally, typically. But yeah, a very big faux pas in that community that you don't want to do. It will hurt your witness if you do that. You do want to go to them and apologize, not because you're agreeing with their lifestyle and what that means, but just from a kind of a respect standpoint of like, I didn't mean to do that. It'd be the same thing if somebody was a drug addict and they wanted to tell people or they wanted to go to AA themselves and I put it on, Instagram, like, they're going to be mad at me. Right.
Yeah.
So
as they should.
Yes. And
for sharing private information.
Absolutely. So that's part of that. And it's a real big thing in their community. They do not like to be outed. It's one of the worst things you could do to them. Other than misgender them or mess their pronoun up.
Yeah. I'm sorry, this long list, but I've just got two more.
Yeah.
Okay. Questioning. What does that mean in this community?
Questioning is similar to queer. And they pretty much, at this point in time, they're pretty much melded together. The Q means queer and questioning. And like we talked about, queer is a very broad brushstroke term, right? And it just means, hey, I'm not heterosexual. I'm not heteronormative. I'm queer. And typically that questioning comes into play of like, I don't really know what I am yet.
Yeah.
And I'm still sort of figuring that out. I know I'm not straight. And again, that's an easy, if I'm in this sort of ROGD, contagion, survival level thing, queers is one of the best things I can identify as. That, pansexual is another broad brushstroke one.
Which means I just am attracted to anybody.
So pansexual, that's the big, so, and where that comes into play, I know a lot of people out there are like, what's the difference between bi and pan? It doesn't make any sense. If I say I'm pansexual, I'm attracted to men, to women. I'm also attracted to men that used to be women.
Right.
I'm also attracted to women that used to be men. I might be attracted to canaries. I might be attracted to goats. I might be attracted to fairies and unicorns and furries and all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of stuff out there.
Is that a thing? Furries?
It is, unfortunately.
It is a real thing.
It is a real thing. I pulled up to Chipotle about a month ago, and a fox handed me my burrito. And I was like, man, okay, so she's a furry. She was literally, in a sense, she didn't tell me this, but in a sense, she was trying to live her life out as a fox.
Wow.
She was dressing up as a fox. She styled her hair like a fox. She had makeup on like a fox. It is a thing where they're trying to identify as non-human things.
Wow.
And that is a very normal thing these days. Going back to pansexual, it's so crazy. My girls have been in theater since they were 6 and 9. And so we have had LGBT discussions for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Last, 10 years at least. And for us, it was very normal to have those conversations. We were constantly educating our children as we went through this and treating the LGBT community that was in the theater well and loving them and having them to our house.
Sure.
And, all these different things and just treating them like we would treat anybody else, treat anybody's child, how we want our children to be treated. Right. And, but it was so crazy. One of my daughter's best friends that she grew up with used to identify as pansexual. I mean, for years. And I can remember asking her, I said, what does pansexuality mean? And she described it to me. And in my mind, I was like, that is not what pansexual is. Now, I could have, laid into her and been like, you're an idiot. And that is not what you're not pansexual because that's not even know what it means. You don't even know what it means. A lot of times they won't know what it means. They're identifying as something. This sounds good, or it's what everybody else is saying, or it's the broad brushstroke thing that's going to get me to survival. She started identifying as pansexual in middle school, and she's now in college, and she's dating a guy. She's as heteronormative as I've ever seen. She's never said, hey, I'm not pansexual anymore. She just doesn't, she just doesn't identify as that anymore.
Right. And
probably will never again. And so, I think again, we just pull back a little bit, love them through it. I bet you we brought that up 2 or 3 times in the last, 7 or 8 years that she told me that.
Wow.
But you just loved her as a person.
Just loved her as a person, and she
created in the image of God.
Yes, and she knew where we stood, and we, we talked good things. She has Christian parents, and so I know she gets the truth at home, and we laid truth on the table so that it is out there and obvious and available. And, and she knew she could ask me questions. She knew she could come to me. But again, she's just, not living that way anymore, not identifying as that anymore. And so, again, you'll see a lot of those broad brushstroke type things, and there won't be a anti coming out party. They just won't identify anymore.
Yeah.
It'll just fade away. And typically when it fades away is, again, it's not cool anymore. I'm not emo anymore. It's not cool anymore. So it's fading away. Or, hey, I did this to survive. I did this to survive middle school. I did this to survive high school. Now I'm
grown up.
And now I'm a junior or senior in high school or a freshman or sophomore in college. It's kind of dumb to do this. I don't need to do that anymore.
Right.
I'm in college now. Everybody, you just sort of start over in college.
Yeah.
That's where you really, that's the first sort of big step of like, hey, everybody here, I can remember there was a guy when I was a freshman in college, and he was the star football player, star quarterback for his high school team. And he told us that for about, I don't know, 6 or 7 days. And then after a while, he was like, you know what?
Nobody cares.
Saying this isn't cool anymore, and no one cares. And so he just became a normal person.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to happen. It's just like, I don't need to say this anymore. I can just be a college student and have friends. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. And so that's what happens.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, do you have,
I was just,
you have one more.
One more as far as, to wrap up this lexicon.
Yeah.
I thought maybe, again, for myself and maybe for somebody else, but mainly for me, just go through these alphabets again, because they say LGBT.
Right.
And what? Okay. L, lesbian.
Yes.
Bisexual.
Yeah. The G is gay.
Okay.
So LGBT,
Yeah.
bisexual, transsexual.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you get to the Q,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be queer or questioning.
So queer or questioning.
Yep. And so,
And what is the
LGBTQ,
IA?
I is going to be intersex. And again, that's somewhat controversial because some love that and some don't love that. And then the A is going to be asexuality and really the A and then you'll see a plus.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
The plus comes in, well, because there's so many definitions.
Yeah, it's like all the others.
They're inventing new ones every day. And so I encourage people, this can be super overwhelming. If you say LGBT or you say LGBTQIA, they'll pretty much accept that. That's a good enough, saying the acronym. But I also encourage people, I think the definitions matter actually more on the homosexual side of things, with things like, well, what do you mean by homosexual, and what, same-sex attraction and things like that. Those definitions matter.
Yeah.
On the trans and non-binary side, the definitions matter, but only from a standpoint of just ask them what they mean by that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great
because
question.
if you try to memorize all the stuff, especially on the trans and non-binary side of things, you'll never get out of your house. So, it's important to know those definitions on some things that are a little bit more black and white. On the things that are very broad and
just so when you're on the receiving end, you'll know.
Yes.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And you just ask, hey, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
What does that even mean? I'm an old person. They'll be fine with it. They understand. Yeah, you're an old person. You have no clue what I'm talking about.
So Jonathan, do you have some suggested resources that we could share with people?
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you guys have a link that you could put?
Yeah, we're actually going to have a folder in the comments section.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I've got a huge list on my notes. My notes should be there for everybody if you just put that link I gave you guys. And on it, I've got a sex and gender resource list.
Awesome.
I've got a lot of books. I've got my favorite book on transgenderism, my favorite book on homosexuality, some cultural things. I put a 10-week online study on there. I really recommend it. And then I put some great books on there for parents of children and youth that either are identifying as these things or just struggling with these things or have friends. I think the hardest thing is well, I'm not even struggling with this and my kid's not struggling with it, but their best friend. Right. And that was our situation where, my wife's like, oh my gosh, this girl's identifying as pansexual. And I'm like, hey, pull back for a minute. Let's just calm down, and I knew in the back of my mind, I was like, she doesn't even know what that means.
Yeah.
But that's, I think one of the harder parts is getting parents to go, okay, I don't know what to do because their friends are identifying as these things, are talking about these things. And I really don't know what to tell my child.
Right.
And so these are some great books, and they're thin, nice, beach read. We're talking 40, 50, 60 page books that are fantastic and easy. You could have it in the car, have it in your pocket as a quick pull out and just reference. And then there's some other things on there. There's some great websites on there as well. Highly recommend. There's a new one out, Identity Project. I would recommend that to every church on the planet. It's the best resource out there, especially on it. They cover a lot of cultural things, faith and culture things, but also sex and gender is probably the 70-80% of what they cover. Just because it's so heightened right now. But incredible, the absolute best experts on the planet. And they put out great daily material, resources, videos, a lot of teaching things that you could listen to yourself and be educated for your family. And then also other teaching things that you could use with church and beyond. So
that's great.
But I've got all those resources on there and a good guide for everybody.
So as we conclude, I know that just about everybody, including me, we're all praying for somebody in our lives who is going through this experience of trying to figure things out. What are some ways that we can pray? What can we ask God to do in their lives?
Sure. I think you ask for truth to be prevalent. I think you ask for them to be open. The biggest thing you could be praying for is for them to be open to conversations. Because that's the number one thing we do is we close them off. And so praying that the Lord would open their hearts, would illuminate Scripture in their lives, that they would keep Christian friends and family members close. I think that's one of the biggest things is, I think we try to pray almost from afar of like, hey, I just hope we help them.
Yeah.
God help them in some way. Whereas make it a little bit more personal of, Lord, please keep a solid Christian believer in this person's life. And if that can be me, may it be so.
Yeah.
Right. And because sometimes it's hard. Maybe they're moving away. Right. Maybe you're like, man, I could be that person, but now they're moving away to college or something like that. And so that's where you can make it personal, but also if they're moving away, you want to be praying that they can find somebody like you that loves them and that wants to be in their life and that wants to be a resource and somebody they can come to when the things of this world don't work. Right. Just like we would tell anybody for anything else, we'd be like, hey, when this doesn't work, when this relationship doesn't work, when you're putting all your stock in this, and this is your idol, and we may not say idol, but like, when all this stuff from the world doesn't work, I'll be here.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest things to pray for, and just pray that they'll be surrounded by Christian friends and people that just love them and don't not accept their lifestyle, but accept them
as a person.
Yeah.
Wow. Jonathan, thank you so much for
sure
taking the time to walk through this really hard thing with such wisdom and compassion for people made in God's image.
I appreciate you guys having me. I love talking about it. If there's any churches out there that would like me to come and speak, I love to speak at churches on this. And
awesome.
Primarily, I'll speak to adults. I can speak to youth too. I changed the lessons up a little bit.
That's great.
But I love to speak to parents and leaders and pastors. So
I appreciate your courage. And this is one of those things that we knew would be awkward, but it would be inevitable because it's such a big part of our culture. I want to remind you that this YouTube video, if you're listening to this on an audio podcast, we've got it on YouTube. Please share this with people who need to hear it. People need to know it. Also, like and subscribe to the Tennessee Golden Hour podcast. We thank you so much.